A mentor of mine once told the story of how he was having a conversation with a friend of his, and the friend said, "There is no such thing as free will." Now, what would you do if I told you exactly that same phrase? There is no such thing as free will. Now, most of us would freak out because it would rock what most of us believe to be true about the world. And that really is a big part of unlearning, isn't it? Now, whatever you feel about free will, whether you believe that it is something that we have and how it's practiced, very much up to you. But the point that was being made by this friend of my mentor was that the reason why he believed that there is no such thing as free will is because when we make a choice, when we act in a certain way, when we speak in a particular way, behave in a certain way, or even think a certain thought, it is all traceable to something that we've learned, to a neural pathway we've developed, to a trauma that we might have had in the past, to a joy, to something we are inclined to. So on that basis, their thinking was there's no such thing as free will or choosing afresh in the moment, because even that choice that sometimes seems fresh is almost premeditated at some level. Ooh. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the idea of how you and I, my unlearner, are what we've learned. We're going to look at that concept and how it can potentially really rock how you think about learning, how you think about showing up and neuroplasticity, and really changing at the level of your brain, but also at the level of your behavior and applying behavior changes that actually last and can be maintained. And then we'll talk about one key thing that you can do to make sure that you are able to learn anew and choose how to show up. So much so that even if you don't believe in willpower, you might end up considering that it possibly does exist. Welcome to this episode of the Unlearners podcast. The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. Now, I shared this idea that was mentioned by my mentor, Michael B. Beckwith, and it was during a session. So I did a full day session with the graduates at Rand Merchant Bank in Sandton, South Africa. And every single year they invite me back and I do a full day session with them on unlearning and relearning, using hindsight, using foresight, but also using insight, and how that creates really a beautiful space for us to unlearn and challenge some of our behaviors. It's always so great because grads come into the workplace with such different perspectives around the world, around work themselves and who they are and what they have to offer the workplace. So when they come in, it's always so much fun because it reminds me firstly of my time when I was a primary school teacher. So I almost feel like I'm back in my grade 5 classroom with these malleable, excited, highly innovative, highly creative minds that ask brilliant questions and have such hope as well. I think when I compare the work that I do with grads, it's always so interesting to see how even the way that they show up in organizations is with such a fresh perspective. Yes, some may say there is a bit of naivety in there, or they are a little bit naive or wet behind the ears or whatever it is. And that may be the case, but they come in with such a fresh perspective that I don't often see with leaders. I don't often see it with people that are a little bit more seasoned and have been in their organizations for a long time, because I work a lot with senior leaders at regional groups and right at the top of organizations in the form of C-suite leaders. So it's always such a beautiful contrast to see. But one thing I am enjoying is watching how our leaders in the organizations that we work with have now become beautifully child-minded or beautifully young, fresh-minded, in the sense that they are open to unlearning and relearning and are excited to challenge themselves. We do a lot of really great puzzles and things at the beginning of the session and throughout, and it just always really gets exciting. The reason why I share that, though, is because when we think about this idea of being what we've learned, and then we start to compare a group like your graduates that are just coming in now, just very almost generically here. Now, we might have some outliers, but these groups are often, the ones I work with are often in their 20s, and they've just come out of university for most of them, and they are doing they were doing an undergraduate degree that they started straight after their matric year, or what you would call their 12th grade year. And so they are within that age group on average. And like I said, there are some outliers, but on average, that's the group that they're part of. So when you compare what those individuals have learned, or the versions of themselves that they bring into the workplace at that stage, and then you compare with leaders that I often work with, that we often work with at the Unlearners, you start to realize that in essence, we really are what we've learned. We can only ever bring to the table the versions of ourselves that we've taught ourselves we need to be in order to survive in the world, or in order to keep ourselves safe, or in order to make the biggest impact, etc. And there are a few different reasons behind that. So I start to see this, and you start to realize that, oh my goodness, the reason why these individuals may think like this, or that person might think like that, is because something must have happened, and then they learned a particular response, or they learned a particular behavior, or they learned to use a set of chronic thinking in order to manage the world, manage other people, manage their feelings as well. So I always find that that's such an interesting thing, because you and I, me and you, my unlearner, all of us unlearners, we don't just learn information, but we learn behaviors, we learn perspectives, we learn mindsets, we learn thought patterns, which very much mindsets are in a way. Those things are learned. And what neuroplasticity has taught us now for a good few years is that those things are learned over time, and the more consistently we practice them, the more they become our defaults, so that even when we do try to change, or even when we do make the decision and we create our vision board and we sit in Zanele's session to start up and plan our year, brand new year, brand new quarter, there still is that propensity to slide back or to backslide, because we've created a default. It's like having an underlying algorithm or an underlying default setting in a device. You try change all the settings, but because there's something underneath there that's playing, you just find that it just keeps going back. Every time you switch your device off, it reinstalls your default. And so what you want to do is you want to obviously reset what the default is. And we'll come to that when I share with you the insights of what to do. What do we then do when we realize that, oh my goodness, everything that I do, everything that I say, how I respond to people, it's all because I've learned it. I am a giant, well, not that you're like huge or anything, but you and I, we are giant representations of our learnings, of our biggest, most potent, most deep learnings. That's all we are as we walk around, especially at the personality level, or at the ego level, as some people might say. One of the other things that I have found that contribute to this, and let me know, think about this. Maybe even open up your phone right now. Go to one of your favorite apps, and I'm going to do this with you. I've got my phone in my hand right now. Go to one of your favorite apps. We might have clicked the exact same one. I'm not going to mention which one it is, but it might just be a picture of a camera as a logo, with beautiful purple, orange colors. So that's all I'll say. So open up your favorite app, and then I just want you to scroll through, maybe just scroll through like once or twice, and then have a look at what content you are getting. Are you enjoying the podcast? Then you'll love our weekly newsletters. You'll get practical tips, tools, insights, and updates on goodies and exciting events to keep you learning, changing, and growing. Go over to the link in the show notes or theunlearners.com to sign up today. And now, back to the episode. Now, you probably know where I'm going with this. But the point that I want to make is that our experiences of the world, what stimuli we receive from the outside world, and when I say outside, I mean outside of ourselves, is all curated and keeps us in these echo chambers that we've chosen. Think about it. As you scroll through, you might be seeing pictures, videos of food, maybe because you're one of those people that like that. As I was scrolling through, I'm seeing videos about growing your self-awareness. I'm seeing videos about running businesses. I just saw a video about my favorite mentor, Denise Duffield Thomas, and she's got her latest podcast episode. Oh, that's nice. And then I'm seeing some training videos because I'm a little bit of a gym bunny as well. All of the things that I see on my feed are only showing up because, very much like ourselves and our brains and our bodies, social media now has started to curate an experience based on what you want to see more of. And then as a result of that, think of it as a vicious cycle. And then as a result of that, you further reinforce those learnings about who you want to be, about the types of things you want to talk about how you want to show up in the world, so that nothing else outside of you then matters or comes through or is important or is worthy of your time. And that's how these echo chambers happen, right? You get stuck with hearing the same thing. You're in this echo, you're saying the same thing, and everyone is saying it back to you. And it's just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, where all you ever hear about is people that run businesses. And then all you ever hear about is spirituality and awareness, because that's your thing. All you ever hear about or talk about is sharks, because that's your thing. Or whatever it is. And you find yourself in this place where your world is just that, your world, because it's teaching you certain things, and then you act out those learnings, and then you just keep getting that back. And that's how we find ourselves. And I often make the joke of, and it's actually not a joke, but I often say to my clients, you think you're living 60 beautiful years, but often it's just 20 years 3 times over. You're just being the same person over and over again. And then you say you're an unlearner, but in essence, you're not, because you're stuck in this echo chamber, learning all the same things and then being that version of yourself that you've learned. And because you're stuck in there, it only just gets reinforced and nothing really ever changes. And that, for me, it can be quite a disruptive thought, something that unsettles us. But I think that the unsettling part of it is really, really good for us. So if you are feeling a little bit like, oh my goodness, Zanele, what are you saying? This is horrible. Then you're in a good place, because it's the awareness of it that has us going, okay, something needs to change here. What can I do here? How can I step into this differently? How do I show up in a way where I can relearn, where I can open myself up to the capacity of free will through opening up my range or my platter of stimuli, opening myself up to new experiences, and making sure that I'm not just regurgitating what I've learned or who I've learned to be, but I'm able to consciously show up anew each and every single moment. And now the thing is, there's nothing wrong with being what you've learned, because that's all you can ever really be. We are a combination of just a bunch of habits, is all we ever are as human beings, and thinking patterns. So if you want to get a different result, in essence, all you need to do is just relearn, learn something new, so that you can show up in a brand new way. You can think in a new way, and you can behave or attain or be something new. And that really is the big idea here that I want to share with you. Now, before I share that very big tip that I want to leave you with for this episode, one of the most exciting stories I've ever heard, and I shared this with the R&B grads I was telling you about at the beginning, was a story of Michelangelo. Now, you may know Michelangelo. He was an Italian artist. So poet, he was a sculptor, he was an artist in the drawing and painting sense, and did a bunch of different things, and was so popular for a few of his works that really he is considered today one of the biggest contributors to art as we know it. So really someone I highly respect, but also love his work. Some of his famous sculptures might include works like your Pieta, which is a sculpture that's made up of the Virgin Mary holding the limp Christ. You also have Moses is another popular one, but another one that is probably right at the top is the David, and definitely a lot of people's favorite, but he's got quite a few under his belt. Now, the story goes, and this is an alleged story. Now, the story goes, when Michelangelo was asked about his process behind his art or his sculptures and how he creates the David, how he creates the Pieta, Apparently, he said that he doesn't consider it his job to create the sculpture, right? Apparently, he believes that all he does, or all that is his responsibility, is just to find, and listen to this is awesome, is just to find the block of stone that already has that artwork in it. I just need to find the block of stone that already has the David in it. And then my sole job is to chip away at the pieces that don't belong to the David and let the David out because it already is there. So all I have to do is relinquish, is remove, is separate the David from everything else that isn't a part of it. When I heard that for the very first time, I went, I wonder, is that true? And then secondly, I was so in love with that phrase because it reminds us of just how pivotal the journey of unlearning is. And that really, in essence, and you can argue a bunch of different things here, but I would argue that our biggest work as we grow, comparing, remember, those grads to leaders who've been in organizations for a while and are more experienced, our biggest job becomes to peel away those layers, to remove everything else that has built up outside of the true, creative, innovative, growth-centric, learning excited versions of ourselves. And that could be anything from what society tells us we need to be, what our families tell us we need to be, what the workplace has created as a box, as a kind of cage for how we're supposed to think, or maybe just the way we've always done things around here can often be something that needs to be unlearned. And a lot of the work that we do within the Unlearners is just about helping teams go, it's okay to chip away the stone that represents what we used to be or who we know ourselves to be so that we can get to the David of what we need to be now. Such interesting work, but I think that analogy or that metaphor is such a great one for us to think about how that version of ourselves already exists. There's nothing necessarily that we need to add. Now, there might be skill gaps, there might be knowledge gaps, there might be some brush ups, change in systems, but if we understand the fact that our biggest learning is moving away from what we've been told we need to be, taking the boxes off, taking the restraints off, and then coming to realize exactly who we need to be in the moment, or the next best version of ourselves, right? Or the current upgrade of ourselves, or our teams, or our business, or even just our industry and our world, I think is such a great one. Okay, so I'm going to close off then with getting a little bit practical with you because I want you to be able to leave here with something you can practice, something you can share with your team, but also something that you can practice yourself, whether at home, just on a day-to-day basis. I always make sure that these episodes, but also that the interventions that we have with our clients are as practical as is possible. It's one thing to get excited, to get inspired and even motivated, but it's another thing to leave the room, leave the episode and know exactly what to do. So I think that that's really important, and learning happens when we're able to apply, right? Understanding then comes in over and above just saying, okay, I see, it makes sense. But then it starts to really become a part of you when you practice it. Are you enjoying the podcast? Then you'll love our weekly newsletters. You'll get practical tips, tools, insights, and updates on goodies and exciting events to keep you learning, changing, and growing. Go over to the link in the show notes or theunlearners.com to sign up today. And now, back to the episode. So what do? I'd like to introduce you to... And the way that this was spelt earlier was really funny for me because my machine here just adjusted the spelling for the surname. So I'd like to introduce you to Cattell's intelligence theory. Now, if you know this theory already before I go into it, let me know in the comments of wherever it is that you are streaming this episode. And I'd love to know your experience with it, what your thoughts are on it, whether you've used it, and also how it works out for you. So the theory in essence says that there are two primary forms of knowledge. And when I say primary forms of knowledge, this is ways that we not only acquire knowledge in a way, but also how we practice it, or how knowledge comes in those two forms. And you'll understand a little bit about what I mean when I explain them. So the first form of knowledge that Cattell speaks about is called crystallized knowledge. And for many of us knowledge workers, we love our crystallized knowledge. If you think about a crystal, it's solid, it's well formed, it's got a shape. And that's almost how I want you to think about crystallized knowledge, because crystallized knowledge is the kind of knowledge that you almost acquire through study. So it's things like facts, it's things like insights that you would have to read, that you would study. It's factual information from a store-based knowledge, so books, from courses and that type of stuff. And if you can think about it in the sense that when you apply crystallized knowledge, it is very industry or case specific. So for example, if I was to say to you, create a precision marketing strategy to help your organization double its revenue within the next year, most of us would go, precision marketing? What's that now? We'd need to ask questions, or our information would need to be brushed up, because we are not necessarily, and I'm putting air quotes up here, industry experts. I often like to shy away from the word expert, but in this sense, I'm just going to use it so you understand exactly what I mean. So very industry specific, helps us solve problems within a very specific space, and it would need us to have had some level of study. So that's then crystallized knowledge. And I think the precision marketing example will give you an idea, but also think about things like someone maybe giving you a recipe. So if someone gives you a cookbook and they go, okay, pick a recipe that I can pair with this wine. Unless you are somewhat of a study of wine and pairing food, you may have a little hard time going there. Now, I might have one or two things that I can try, because I did do hospitality studies in school, but otherwise I got nothing. I would just go, I know that tastes good, let's put them together. But there wouldn't be necessarily any kind of calculated strategy behind it. For example, with I know that for sure pork works really well with an apple sauce, and then this kind of wine, because the flavors somehow dance together in my mouth in a way that's not overly acidic or whatever it is. So that would be crystallized knowledge. Now, as I explain this, really ask yourself what that looks like in your space. Now, that's a first form. The second form of intelligence, so knowledge, intelligence, they serve the same purpose. So the second type is fluid intelligence or fluid knowledge. So fluid intelligence then is almost the opposite. And you can think about it as the opposite, but that might be a little bit restrictive. But it is the second form, according to Cattell's intelligence theory. And fluid, if you think about, so crystal was solid, well-formed, it's got a shape. It's not as malleable, or it doesn't move as smoothly. Fluid intelligence, then, on the other hand, you almost want to think of water and how water is malleable, and it moves around freely, and it changes form, and it readjusts to its environment. But also it has a beautiful impact on the things around it, depending on how quickly it moves, or how long it's there, and its stagnance, and all of those types of things. So fluid knowledge then is the ability to solve new problems. So a new problem that somehow doesn't even fit into your conventional area of expertise or knowledge. It's like saying, and this is the example that I love to use, it's like me saying to you, oh my goodness, guys, I have just lost my dog, and she disappeared on Saturday morning, and it's now Tuesday. I have no idea where she was. She left, and I have no idea what to do. Please write me a list of 5 places that I can look. Now, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a marketer, whether you are a space explorer, whatever you are, or whatever space you're in, or whether you've had a dog or not, that question or that problem or challenge is going to be a lot easier for you. Why? Because very much like fluid intelligence, what it is based on, it's based on logic and reason. Sometimes even if it is, and this is something I want you to get, sometimes even if the challenge or the problem is specifically in an area of someone else's expertise, like for example, it might be in an engineering problem. Have you ever had something happen around the house where it maybe was something wrong with the tap, or maybe the tap was leaking, or something was happening outside to do with the hose pipe, or something around the house that is within someone's arsenal of knowledge. But when you looked at it, you went, okay, so the water's coming out of here, the tap is over there, and there's a puddle over here. This is what I think is happening. And so what you've done there is you have taken a range of insights from different spaces within your knowledge or your intelligence. So experiences you might have had, things you might have heard people speak about in the past, things you might have seen, stuff from even your field. Maybe you're in marketing or you're in sales, but you've taken really interesting concepts and insights and applied them to a space that isn't necessarily related to that, using logic and reasoning. That is fluid intelligence. Because just like water, remember fluid, just like water, fluid intelligence is able to move. It's able to shape itself around whatever context you need it to move into, mainly because it applies logic and reason. Now, here's the interesting thing. Rumor has it that when Einstein passed away, they opened up his skull. And I think I might have shared this before. They opened up his skull and they cut his brain open. Now, the assumption here is obviously that people can't feel it when you cut their brain open when they're dead. So you might go, ouch. So apparently they found that there was a myriad of dendritic connections over and above, so over the average amount. And basically what this means is that Einstein, as an individual, as a human being, had exposed himself to a diverse number of experiences, conversations, fields, subject matter, experiences that allowed him to have this beautiful tapestry of experiences, tapestry of knowledge and insights and information and stimuli, so that when he did come back to his lab, when he did come back to his place of work, he was able to draw from so many different spaces and then use logic and reason as well as crystallized knowledge to then find solutions. And most of us do this as well. But the thing that I want to share with you is not just that some of us do it or what it is, it's that I would love to encourage you to be the type of person who really focuses on building fluid intelligence. From now on, whether it is something you focus on already, maybe it's time to ramp it up. Because the more fluid you can be in your intelligence and in your experiences, then it means you can ebb and flow according to what is happening in the moment. Now, I'm not saying don't specialize. That is not at all what I'm saying during this conversation. All I'm saying is expose yourself to a range of different stimuli. Not so you can enjoy it. Someone said to me once, "Oh, Zanele, are you trying to say I need to go and be a Swiftie and enjoy it?" No, I'm not saying go into the experience or go into the restaurant of the type of food you don't quite enjoy just so you can start to like it. I'm saying expose yourself to a range of different stimuli so that when you come back into your place of work or you go somewhere else, you have a wide tapestry of insights through which or from which to draw when you solve problems and challenges as well. Probably one of my favorite things to do is exactly that, because I understand the impact it can have on me and the person that I'm becoming and how I am relearning and building this new version of myself. So that's my big tip that I wanted to share with you is because you are what you've learned. If you feel you could be a little bit more of an unlearner, then learn anew. Open yourself up. Through learning, we can only change through adjusting what we are learning on a day-to-day. And that's how change happens. It means there are new hypotheses, there are new conclusions that you've come to. And as a result, your path is then shifting to then match that through your actions, through your words, and through your thoughts. Now, if you loved today's conversation around you being what you have learned and then relearning all of those behaviors, those mindsets, and those perspectives, then definitely do reach out to the team at The Unlearners. This is what we do all day, every single day, is support teams like yours and individuals like you who are relearning, individuals who are open to challenging long-standing dogmas and beliefs around who they're supposed to be, how we're supposed to do business, what the world is and how we're supposed to show up in it. If that's you, if that's your team, if your team is giving birth to something new, we would love to work with you and help you get some really exciting results in building a culture of learning, unlearning, and relearning. That's it for today's episode of the Unlearners podcast, my unlearner. Definitely do reach out at theunlearners.com and we would be more than happy to chat to you about an intervention that works well for your team, where you are, and what you would love to achieve. Signing out, it's been myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady. All of the best with increasing your capacity for fluid intelligence and challenging those long-standing dogmas so you can relearn to become the next best version of yourself. Bye for now. The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.